You might see a new training center or some educational program pop up and think, hey, I could do that too.
Right.
But in Georgia, well, launching a post-secondary institution, it isn't quite as simple as just, hanging out a sign.
Not at all. There's a whole formal process. It's governed by the Non-Public Post-Secondary Educational Institutions Act of 1990.
And you absolutely have to go through this process before you can even, advertise or start teaching anything.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into, well, what it actually takes to get that green light.
That's right. So if you're maybe thinking about starting an institution in Georgia, or even if you're just kind of curious about how these things are regulated, this deep dive, it's for you.
Yeah, we're going to unpack the steps you need to take to get a certificate of authorization from the Georgia Non-Public Post-Secondary Education Commission. We'll probably call them G and PEC, just to keep it shorter.
Good idea, G and Peck. So think of this as like your insider's guide to understanding how this whole thing works.
And just to be clear, we're not just making this stuff up.
Yep. No, definitely not.
We're pulling all this information straight from the official source. It's the Apply for a Certificate of Authorization page on the GNPEC website.
Right. So our mission today is really to give you a clear step-by-step roadmap. What does an institution actually need to do to get authorized in Georgia? We'll focus on the key requirements and the different stages.
Okay, so where do we start? The very first phase seems to be all about initial review and just getting prepared.
Yeah, and what's really interesting right away is how much GNPEC emphasizes doing your homework first.
Totally. They make it super clear. Before you even think about sending in a proposal, you need to really go through their entire website thoroughly.
And they point to specific documents too, don't they?
They do. The minimum standards criteria, the schedule of fees, and something called the initial application process flowchart.
Okay, so those three sound pretty important.
Yeah, this first step is really just about understanding the landscape.
Yeah.
What are the rules of the game?
And speaking of rules, there's something under Standard 8 that kind of jumps out early on.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's a recommendation, but they suggest having access to liquid funds, cash, basically.
Okay. How much?
Enough to cover about 90 days of your estimated operating expenses.
Wow, 90 days.
Right.
3 months.
Yeah. And it's not just a random guess either. They actually have you estimate those expenses on a GNPEC financial statement form during the initial application.
Huh. So, right from the get-go, you need to be thinking really seriously about the financial side, the runway, basically.
Exactly. It kind of makes you think, how many new businesses really have to plan that carefully about finances right at the very beginning?
That's a good point. And,
Yeah.
this early focus on financial stability, it sort of signals that GNPEC wants to make sure any place they authorize actually has the resources to, well, operate responsibly.
Makes sense. It's not just about having a cool program.
Right. It's also about showing you can actually deliver it reliably, week after week, month after month.
Okay, so you've spent time on the GNPEC site, you've read those key documents, you've thought hard about the money side. What's the next concrete step?
The next formal step is actually putting together and submitting your institutional proposal.
Ah, okay, so this is like your official, hey, we want to do this document.
Pretty much. It's your formal declaration of intent to set up shop in Georgia.
And it sounds like GNPEC tries to give feedback pretty quickly on that.
Yeah, they mentioned you should expect to hear back via email within about 10 business days after they get your proposal. They might have questions or need more info.
10 business days? That seems pretty reasonable for an initial check.
It does. It suggests they have a pretty organized process right from the start. Lets you sort out any big questions early on.
Right, saves you going too far down the wrong path, potentially. Okay, proposal submitted. Maybe you got some feedback. What's next?
Okay, here's a big one. Before you can even get into their online application portal, it's called Edvura, you have to attend an initial authorization training.
Ah, okay, so it's not optional, it's mandatory.
Mandatory. Required for everyone going through the process. No exceptions mentioned.
Which makes sense, right? They probably want to make sure everyone's on the same page about the expectations and how to use the system.
Exactly. And they also really stress going back to that initial application process flowchart again.
Right, the one you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, they say it's important for understanding the timelines and what's expected when.
So this mandatory training, it seems like GNTech is really trying to ensure consistency. Everyone gets the same baseline info.
That seems right. Probably helps minimize mistakes and delays later on if everyone's got the same foundation.
Okay, training done. Now let's talk programs, the actual education part. What do you need there?
Right, the core of it all. For every single program you plan to offer, you need fully developed curriculum documents.
Fully developed, meaning?
Well, at a minimum, they say you need a comprehensive program outline, a detailed syllabus for every course in that program, and thorough lesson plans.
Outline, syllabus, lesson plans. Got it.
And they also mentioned they might ask for other documents, too, depending on the program.
Okay. And there's a really important point here, specifically for institutions that aren't already accredited, right?
Yes, absolutely. For unaccredited institutions trying to get authorized for the first time, there's a pretty significant limitation on new program applications.
Which is?
Initially, you can only apply for programs offered in one modality.
Modality meaning how it's delivered, like in person or online.
Exactly. In person, fully online,
Mm.
or hybrid, a mix of both. You have to pick just one to start with for your initial application package.
Huh. So even if you have the same degree, say business administration, if you want to offer it online A&D in person.
For an unaccredited place starting out, that actually counts as two separate program applications. Each modality is reviewed as its own program.
Wow, okay. That's a really key planning detail.
Definitely something to factor in. It suggests they really look closely at how you're delivering the education, not just what you're teaching.
Mhm.
Each delivery method has its own challenges, right?
Makes sense. Different tech needs, different teaching approaches, maybe.
Precisely. It kind of asks the question, have you really thought through the specifics of teaching online versus in a classroom?
Good point. All right, so programs are developed, training's complete. Now it's finally time for the main application in that Advera system.
Yes, but only after you've done the training and you've paid a non-refundable application evaluation fee.
Ah, okay. Got to pay to play, basically.
Seems that way. Once you're in Advera, you'll see the application is pretty involved. It's a mix of filling out web forms, uploading specific GNPEC documents you've completed, providing your own documents, they call those exhibits, and making some formal statements or attestations.
And the list of things you need is pretty long.
It is quite comprehensive, yeah. It really covers the bases for setting up and running an institution.
So what are some of the highlights? What absolutely has to be there?
Okay, well, first, there's basic institutional info you enter on a web form. And a really crucial piece here is proof you're registered with the state. You need a certificate of authority and annual registration from the Georgia Secretary of State.
Right, the basic legal paperwork. Can't operate without it.
Nope. Then there's that minimum standards criteria form we mentioned earlier. That's a GNPEC document you fill out and upload showing how you meet their standards.
Okay. And then the program applications.
Yep, a separate new program application web form for each program. And remember, those limits for unaccredited places, no graduate degrees initially, limits on the number of programs, and that single modality restriction.
Right. Even accredited places have a limit, you said. 10 programs included in the fee.
Yeah, 10 programs are included in that initial evaluation fee for accredited institutions. If you want to apply for more than 10 right away, there are additional fees per program.
Gotcha. Then there are the exhibits, the documents the institution creates.
Correct. That includes things like a sample of your enrollment agreement or student contract.
Okay, what the student signs.
Exactly. Also, an example of the certificate or diploma you'll award, a description of your facilities and equipment, classrooms, labs, computers, whatever you're using.
Makes sense. What else?
Your full institutional catalog, and they actually provide catalog guidelines telling you what needs to be in it. Also, an organizational chart showing who's who in the administration.
Who reports to whom.
Right. And personnel data inventory forms for your staff.
Yeah.
Basically, info about your instructors and administrators.
Okay, that's a lot of exhibits. Anything else for the application?
Yes, a few more key things.
Right.
There are attestations, formal promises, essentially, like a records agreement and a director's agreement.
Okay.
You also upload that GMPAC financial statement document we talked about earlier, showing your financial plan.
And they mentioned the 90-day cash reserve again there.
They reiterate the recommendation, yes.
Yeah.
Minimum of 90 days of projected operating expenses, cash on hand.
Okay. And tuition.
Yep. You provide detailed tuition info plus projections for your first fiscal year, all through a web form. And then information on the fees involved.
Right. You mentioned the application evaluation fee already. What else?
There's the main authorization fee itself and also the Tuition Guarantee Trust Fund fee, the TGTF fee.
TGTF fee.
Yes, and they specify that one is required for the first 7 years you're authorized.
7 years. Wow. Okay, that is a really detailed list. It just highlights how thorough this process is.
It really does. It makes you think about where institutions might most likely run into issues putting all that together.
For sure. So once you've managed to gather all that, paid the evaluation fee, and hit submit on the initial application, what happens?
That's when GNPEC assigns you a specific person, a regulatory specialist, or RS.
Ah, okay. So you get a dedicated contact person.
Exactly. They're basically your guide for the rest of the journey. They help you navigate everything that comes next.
What's their first big task then?
One of their main jobs is to manage the financial viability assessment. So they take all that financial documentation you submitted.
The statements, the projections.
Right. And they send it off to an external independent auditor for a detailed review.
An outside auditor. Okay. So they're really scrutinizing the finances.
Seems so. And that auditor, they might come back and ask for even more financial documents.
Okay.
Or, if they see some potential issues, they might require the institution to develop what's called a financial improvement plan.
Sort of a corrective action plan for the money side?
Kind of, yeah. Or, the best outcome, they just issue an approved financial assessment. Your RS helps you through all this.
Okay, so finances get checked by an auditor. What does the regulatory specialist do after that?
After the financial piece, the RS themselves does a really deep dive into your entire application package.
So they review everything else.
Everything. It's not just ticking boxes. They do a standards-based assessment of all your documents, and they evaluate the content of your proposed programs very carefully.
So they're looking at, like, the quality of the curriculum, too.
Definitely. They check if the programs are consistent with your institution's mission and resources first. Then they look closely at the program length, the delivery method, that modality thing again, and the actual content.
Okay.
Does it match the objectives? Does it meet GNPEC's requirements?
Can you make changes if they find issues?
Yes. They mention you'll get feedback and chances to revise things, but, and this is important, there's no guarantee your program will be approved.
And if none of your programs get approved?
Well, GNPEC is very clear. An institution cannot be authorized in Georgia without at least one approved academic program.
Makes sense. You need something to teach. Okay, now, what if your school has an actual physical building in Georgia?
Yeah. If you have a physical campus or teaching site within Georgia, then the regulatory specialist will actually come out and conduct an on-site visit.
Okay, they come see the place.
Exactly. And they have site visit guidelines on their website that explain what they're looking for during that visit.
All right. So let's say the RS has done the review, maybe done a site visit, the finances checked out, the programs look good, everything seems to meet the requirements. What's next?
Once the RS gives the thumbs up, basically confirms everything meets GNPEC standards, that's when you need to pay the rest of the fees.
Okay, the ones you mentioned earlier.
Right. The Tuition Guarantee Trust Fund fee, the TDTF, and the main authorization fee. The amounts are calculated in that Advera system, but you can always double-check the Schedule of Fees document, too.
And after the fees are paid, then you finally get it.
Then finally, yes, after all requirements are met and all fees are paid, GNPEC issues your official certificate of authorization.
The thing you've been working towards this whole time, how long is it good for?
It's valid for a maximum of 1 year from the date it's issued.
Just 1 year.
1 year maximum initially, yes.
Yeah.
And you have to display it prominently somewhere obvious at your institution.
Okay, so getting authorized isn't a one-and-done deal. It needs yearly attention.
Absolutely. It's an annual renewal process. You have to submit a renewal application through Advera and pay the renewal fees every year.
Is there a deadline for that?
Yes, and it's important. You need to get the complete renewal application and fees in no later than 60 calendar days before your current certificate expires.
60 days before? What happens if you're late?
There are late fees. If you submit between 59 days and 30 days before expiration, there's a 25% late fee penalty on top of the regular renewal fees.
Ouch. And if you're even later?
If you submit within those last 30 days before it expires, the late fee jumps to 50%.
Wow, steep penalties. And what if you just miss the expiration date completely?
That's serious. If you don't get a complete renewal submitted by the expiration date, your authorization just lapses. It's gone.
Meaning you have to stop operating.
Immediately. You're no longer legal to operate in Georgia, and if you want to get authorized again later,
Don't tell me.
you have to start all over again from square one. The entire initial application process, including all those initial fees.
Wow, so staying on top of that renewal is absolutely critical.
Absolutely crucial. Okay, one last specific group to mention. Institutions that are not accredited by a U.S. Department of Education recognized agency.
Right, the unaccredited ones. Are there extra rules for them even after they get authorized?
Yes, a couple of ongoing requirements. First, they have to submit something called the GNPEC Student Outcome Data Report every year with their renewal application.
Okay, tracking student results. Makes sense.
It covers data from their previous fiscal year. Second, and this is really important for student interaction, they must give every single student the official GNPEC student disclosure form when they enroll.
A specific form from GMPIC.
Yes, and it has to be signed by both the student and someone from the institution. A copy then has to be kept in the student's permanent file.
And can the school change that form at all?
Nope, GNPEC is explicit. The institution cannot alter or revise that form in any way. It has to be presented as is.
So that form is like a direct piece of standardized information from the state agency to the student, ensuring transparency for those attending non-accredited schools.
Exactly. It seems like these extra steps for non-accredited places are about providing, a baseline level of consumer protection and accountability since they don't have that external accreditation oversight.
Well, that was incredibly detailed, a real deep dive into getting and keeping that certificate of authorization in Georgia.
It really is a multi-stage process, isn't it?
Mhm.
It requires a ton of attention to detail and just really sticking to all those GNPEC standards and procedures.
So for our listeners, whether you're actually thinking about starting a school in Georgia, or maybe you were just curious about how that whole sector is regulated, well, you should now have a much clearer picture of what's involved.
Yeah, it's quite the journey. And, this whole structured process, it really highlights the state's focus on ensuring some level of quality and accountability for students in this non-public post-secondary world.
That's true. It definitely makes you think, doesn't it? What does having such a thorough authorization process really signify about the value placed on educational standards and maybe student protection in this sector? Something to mull over.